Hello, everyone, and welcome to More Talks from Thomas More University, where we present short, powerful talks devoted to spreading ideas, thoughts, and information to our community. I'm your host, Michael Orr, and today I'm very excited to introduce our panelist, Dr. Chris Lorentz, Professor of Biological Sciences and Director of the Thomas More University Biology Field Station. Before we get started, I just do want to give a quick reminder that this More Talk is being recorded and will be made available on Thomas More University's Moreover website. We will be sending a link out to its location, which will be at more.thomasmore.edu after the presentation. If you find this talk engaging and thought-provoking, please feel free to share it with others. And as a further note, we will be having a Q&A section after Dr. Lorentz has finished his presentation. We are all probably at this point very familiar with Zoom's chat function. If during the course of the presentation you have questions you would like to submit for Dr. Lorentz about the topic, please feel free to use the chat. I have some questions prepared myself, but I'm more than happy to moderate yours as well. And without further ado, I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Chris Lorentz. Dr. Lorentz, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Michael, for having me. I appreciate this opportunity. I also want to thank all of you participants for joining us today to hear about the Ohio River. So as Michael said, I'm Chris Lorentz. I'm a professor of biology at Thomas More University, and I'm also director of our field station. And the field station allows me the opportunity to work on the Ohio River. It's a great extension of the classroom. We have courses out here, a lot of summer research with undergraduates, and then we're also able to bring out K through 12 groups. And today we're going to talk about the value of the Ohio River, both culturally, economically, and also recreationally for our region. And fortunately, we have a really great summary report, a historical report that provides us an in-depth look at the economic value of the river. And it's titled, "What's a River Worth? Evaluation Survey of the Ohio River Corridor." And three groups sponsored this report. Those three groups are the Ohio River Valley Sanitation Commission, or SANCO, the National Park Services, and the Ohio River Basin Commission. And as I mentioned, this is an economic report on the Ohio River Corridor produced in 1994. And one of the sponsors I want to highlight in particular, and that's SANCO. And I would urge you to look at their website if you're interested in the water quality of the Ohio River and lots of other facets. And we're really fortunate in this region to have SANCO to work on the Ohio River. They were formed in 1948 to mainly address wastewater treatment on the river, but they've since expanded. They look at contact recreation, source water protection for our drinking water, fish consumption, all sorts of monitoring and assessment of the river. And there's very few rivers in the country that has SANCO, has a group dedicated to safeguarding the resources of the river. So in this report, there's lots of information, and that report is on SANCO's website. And I'm going to provide a brief summary of their findings. So they defined the Ohio River Corridor as 72 counties bordering the river, and these 72 counties consisted of 200 riverfront communities with approximately 6 million people living in the corridor. The direct economic impact of the river includes 600 businesses employing 35,000 people with over $1 billion payroll. And as much as 75% of the economy in some counties were dependent upon the river. Apart from this, the river provides a transportation artery and an economic impact. So at that time, 235 million tons of commodities were transported on the river, and compare that to about 30 million tons for the Great Lakes, so much greater commercial traffic on the river. And this industry included 4,000 businesses employing over 150,000 people, included a $5 billion payroll related to river transport. They also mentioned and discussed the historic and cultural value of the river, from Native American artifacts to early settlers. And in total, there are 1,885 sites on the National Registry of Historic Places within this corridor. Lots of tourism and recreation within the corridor as well. They estimated 500 plus river-related events per year within these communities, generating $100 million plus per year. And lastly, there's much ecological value with the river. So between the fish, 125 plus species currently reside in the river, nearly 50 species of mussels. These organisms provide what we call ecosystem services. So water filtration, habitat, food, all are values that this community provides us. So that's a summary of the report. And again, I would urge you to go to their website and look at the report itself if you're interested in learning more. And as I mentioned, this report was completed in '94. So great report, very comprehensive, but I think it's time for an update. So a little background on the river before we get into some of the current issues and challenges that we face today. So many of you probably know a little bit about the river, but this is Ohio River 101. The river starts on our right in Pittsburgh, and it flows generally southwest down to Cairo, Illinois. It's about 981 miles long. And our field station is located right in the middle of the river. So if you were to optimally select a position to put a research facility along the Ohio River, you would pick this place. So we got lucky. We got our field station located just upstream of Cincinnati, about halfway down the river. I also want to highlight the blue shaded area. And this blue shaded area is the watershed. And it's a large watershed relative to the river. It encompasses about 200,000 square miles, parts of 14 states. And when we're next to the river, it's quite big, and it is a big river, but relative to the watershed, the river gets a lot of runoff from the land, and that impacts some of the water quality and some of the issues we see in the river. So we have the river plus the watershed that we study when we're looking at the resources of the river. And as I mentioned, our field station is located about halfway down the river in Campbell County, Kentucky, across the shore from New Richmond, Ohio. And this is a teaching and research facility that focuses on the ecology and water quality of the Ohio River. So we have houses for student interns, we have a conference center, and a couple other buildings, including this main building located on the river. This is our research building. It contains water quality labs to monitor the conditions of the river. It contains wet labs, aquaculture labs where we rear hellbenders and fish, and also a mussel lab where we propagate endangered and threatened species of mussels. In addition to our research, we focus on outreach out here at the field station. And so there's our STEM Outreach Center, recently built in 2018. And here we offer K-12 field trips, seminars for the public, hold small scientific conferences as well. And so on the bottom left-hand picture, you can see a field trip with middle schoolers. And then on the right is a picture of our high school STEM camp. Both our research and our outreach focuses on the Ohio River ecosystem and the ecological value it provides. So I love this poster. We actually have a mural of this poster in our lab building, and it shows life below the surface. And surprisingly, the visitors that come out, particularly younger students, are surprised with how much life is below the surface. And in actuality, the Ohio River is one of the most diverse big rivers in the country. As I mentioned, we have 125 plus species of fish in the river, 50 plus species of mussels, and a whole host of other organisms, including this paddlefish here, which is one of our signature big river species. Between paddlefish, gar, sturgeon, these are ancient relic species found only in the Ohio and Mississippi rivers in the country. So we're really proud of the biodiversity in the river, and we love to educate folks about just how rich and speciose the river is. Our field station used to be a lock and dam facility. So this is Lock and Dam 35, a picture of our field station taken in 1925. The site was built in 1919. And if you look on the lower right or middle right, you can actually see our lab building today when it was once a lock house. So these locks and dams were built between 1879 and 1929 on the Ohio River to alleviate this low flow conditions. And this is often surprising too when people see this picture of the river taken back in 1883, and the depth was 1 foot 11 inches. So pre-dam conditions of the river were very different from today. And during the summertime, so here's August 24th, the river could get really low. So the dams like our site were put on the river to raise the level for navigation. Early settlers would travel down the river using what were called flatboats and other types of boats. And you can see how shallow the river is. You can see some logs on the lower left. You can see a canoe in the picture, as well as these folks paddling their way down the Ohio River. And so it's a very different river when we settled the river in the late 1700s, early 1800s. So those traveling to Cincinnati back in 1788 when the city was established would have come along these flatboats if they came by water. And then soon after, we had the steamboat era in the 1800s. Again, the river is very different, very shallow in many cases, in many places. So it would be a long haul for steamboats to travel down the river. Yet the river provided lots of opportunities for people to settle and develop the valley. We celebrated our heritage of steamboat in the steamboat era with what's called tall stacks. I'm sure many of you remember these events. They started in 1988 with the bicentennial of the city of Cincinnati, and they occurred in 88, they occurred 5 other times, and this was a huge tourist event. Over 800,000 visitors would attend these events each year, and it really celebrated our culture as a river city and our legacy and our heritage of the steamboat era. We also have a legacy and a heritage with the Underground Railroad, as many of you know. So this map here shows many of the lines in which slaves would cross the river to escape to the north for their freedom. So from a slave perspective, the Ohio River symbolized the border of the promised land for many slaves. And we celebrate that heritage with the Underground Freedom Center. So again, very much a cultural history associated with the river from our past. Fast forward to the mid-20th century, we shifted from those original locks and dams like the one that was at our field station on the left to modern locks and dams like Melville on the right. So beginning in 1955, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers began replacing the original locks and dams with bigger steel and concrete dams. So today we have 20 dams produced from the original 51 dams. And these modern dams really enhanced the capacity of transportation of the Ohio River. So here's a modern tow on the river carrying 12 barges. And the river the Corps maintains a river channel of about 12 feet. And the average depth of the river is 26 feet. So it's extremely different river from the pre-dam days of the 17 and 1800s. So the transportation value of the river cannot be overstated. Here we are with the red circle highlighting the Ohio River as part of the inland water system. So there's a series of big rivers, the Ohio, the Missouri, the Mississippi, and others that transport many commercial goods throughout the country. And the Ohio River, as I mentioned, carries more cargo than the Great Lakes combined. And here are some of the products carried on the river today: coal, petroleum products, chemical products, and other materials. And the transportation capacity of the river, I think, will only increase in the future. Partly because barge transport, may be surprising to some, is one of the greenest forms of commercial transportation we have. So if you take a look at this graph, it's a little busy, but look at the green rectangle. One 15 barge tow, similar to the photo previously, is equivalent to 216 rail cars plus 6 locomotives, or over 1,000 semi-tractor trailers. So you can imagine the amount of truck traffic that would have to replace the barges on the river if we had to reduce our barge traffic. So it's really green in the sense of environmental perspective, and it's green in the sense of economic perspective. And of course, drinking water value is huge to us in the region. Both the Greater Cincinnati Waterworks in Cincinnati and the Northern Kentucky Water District draw their water from the Ohio River. So it's the source of drinking water for our region. And the intakes, if you're on the 275 bridge, look downstream of that 275 bridge and you'll see intakes at both agencies, the Waterworks and the Water District. The Water District in Cincinnati has over 1 million customers, and the Northern Kentucky Water District has over 300,000 customers that get their drinking water from the Ohio River. And in total, the Ohio River is a source of drinking water for approximately 5 million people. So a safe, reliable source of drinking water is what the Ohio River provides us. And there's huge recreational value on the river as well. If you're out on the river or near the river in the summer, you will see people taking advantage of these activities, from boating to fishing to paddling and even swimming. We have the Great Ohio River Swim each September, and so we encourage folks to get out on the river, experience it up close, and have these opportunities to recreate in our backyard. And one such opportunity is the Ohio River Paddlefest, which is in its 20th year. And it was originally established by the Ohio Riverway, since taken over by the Adventure Crew. And this is a picture, one of my favorite pictures of Paddlefest, down near the suspension bridge. And looking at this picture, just people celebrating the river, enjoying the river up close and personal. It's really a great event. I suspect many of you have been involved with Paddlefest. If not, I would strongly recommend it. And the ACA, the American Canoe Association, regards Paddlefest as the largest single-day paddling event in the country. So think about that. The Ohio River offers the largest single-day paddling event in the country. And since Adventure Crew took over the operations of the Paddlefest, the proceeds go to supporting inner city use, urban use, to get outside and recreate, whether it's paddling, kayaking, hiking. So it's really a good cause as well. And an extension of Paddlefest is the Ohio River Recreation Trail. And this is a newly formed group that's dedicated to establishing both a water trail on the river itself, as well as a bike trail. So it's a 274-mile land and waterway, self-guided adventure trail that connects people to opportunities for outdoor adventure, recreation, and discovery on and along the Ohio River from Portsmouth, Ohio to West Point, Kentucky. The Ohio River Recreation Trail received an assistance grant from the National Park Services, and so they're really developing this trail from a multitude of perspectives, both recreational opportunities, but also historic and tourism as well. In conjunction with this trail, they developed a digital guide to the Ohio River, and this was primarily developed by OKI and Dave Rudder and others there. And it's a really high-tech, useful, effective guide if you want to get out on the river in your canoe or kayak or a boat. So this is a part of the map, and it shows various amenities from campgrounds to restaurants to boat ramps. It also provides river conditions. So what's the wind speed, what's the velocity, that allow us to safely recreate on the Ohio River. And then it's also going to emphasize tourist sites. So if you want to get a little bit of culture, a little bit of visiting historic sites along the river, this guide has it as well. So anyone who wants to enjoy the river from the water or the bike trails or the walking trails, I would strongly encourage you to visit the website of the Ohio River Recreational Trail and click on the digital guide. I have no doubt that you'll find it useful if you're a user of the river. And just a note about outdoor recreation, I think this is an opportunity for us to both enhance the recreational opportunities, but also the economic value of the river. And so this chart shows various consumer products or various economic aspects, and outdoor recreation is described as an overlooked economic giant. So yearly, it produces $646 billion in consumer spending. Number 3 on this list. So like I said, I think we have an opportunity to not only enhance recreational opportunities, but provide great economic value to the regions that support the trail. Alongside the recreational opportunities is the entertainment value of the river. So here's a well-known one for our region, the Banks. But as that 94 report mentioned, 200 plus river communities, many of whom are developing the riverfront. So we're opening our door and turning our front doors to the river once again with projects like the Banks, Newport on the Levee, Covington's doing the same. So lots of opportunities to expand the development along the river with restaurants, parks, etc., that also drive the economics of the region as well. So what's a river worth? Well, here are some of the values or resources that we discussed, plus some few others. On the right, if you're looking on the clock, say 11 o'clock, we have the drinking water value, transportation, food source. There's commercial fishing on the Ohio River, recreation and tourism, mineral extraction, lots of gravel is mined underneath the river. We talked about the ecological value briefly, animal, plant, and aquatic habitat. We didn't mention the other water uses for agricultural and industry, but those are widespread. So what's a river worth would take into account all these different resources to assess its economic worth. We have a couple examples of other places in the country that have done this. So the Chesapeake Bay Foundation has estimated that cleaning up the bay is worth nearly $130 billion or $22 billion per year for generations, whether it's cleaner water, irrigation opportunities, real estate values increase, etc. So a multitude of perspectives or aspects in which the river can enhance the value of the region. The Colorado River generates $1.4 trillion a year in economic benefits annually for some of the same resources for which the Ohio River is used. So we have that 94 report telling us what the river's worth back then. And like I said, I think we need an update to that report and a more comprehensive assessment on exactly the economic benefit of our Ohio River. Fortunately, we have a group that's working on that. So the Ohio River Basin Alliance is a nonprofit group started in 2009. And their mission is to advocate for both the ecological health and the economic well-being of the Ohio River Basin through sound laws, policies, projects, and the funds to support them. And essentially what the Ohio River Basin Alliance is attempting to do is to create a unified voice for the Ohio River. We have a voice in this country for the Chesapeake Bay. We have a voice in this country for the Great Lakes. We need a stronger, more unified voice for the Ohio River and the resources it provides. And the voice is starting to be articulated, starting to be developed, at least that unified voice with this strategic plan. And so between the Ohio River Basin and Orsenco, its fiscal sponsor, a strategic plan is being developed to protect, preserve, enhance the resources of our river. And in 2019, ORBA received a $150,000 non-federal match from the state of Kentucky, Commonwealth of Kentucky. In addition, they received matching in-kind donations from Orsenco and soon began executing a $400,000 U.S. Army Corps of Engineers planning assistance to states initiative. And this initiative will develop an Ohio River Basin strategic plan for achieving 8 Ohio River Basin goals. A draft of this plan is out and up on the website, so I would encourage you to go look at this website if you're interested in the details. But essentially, the plan has established 8 goals around protecting the resources of the river. We want to keep an abundant, clean water source. We want to provide economic development for our waterfront communities. We want to maintain healthy and productive ecosystems. We want to base our decisions and our actions and our policies on knowledge and education to make informed decisions. In other words, use sound science and data to drive this plan. We want to enhance, encourage, expand nature-based recreation, increase river transportation, and finally, underlying all these goals is to have an adaptive management and resilience strategy. So we know things like climate change, we know things like this pandemic are going to change the equation and really force us to adapt this plan for future changing conditions. And so they provide this model or this methodology so that this plan is very, we can implement this plan successfully. So I'm excited about the plan. That's the first step, get the plan before we can implement it. And I think there's a lot of momentum, there's a lot of excitement, and there's a lot of motivation around formulating that unified single voice for the river. And beyond ORBA and beyond Orsenco, this is really a collaborative effort. You know, the Ohio River is a large river, the watershed's even larger. So for us to achieve the goals of protecting this resource, it's going to take a lot of people. Unfortunately, we have a lot of agencies, a lot of organizations that are focused on these efforts. So as I mentioned, Orsenko and ORBA, the Ohio River Basin Alliance, are leading the way. But places like our field station, the Foundation for Ohio River Education, the Ohio River Recreation Trail, the Ohio River Foundation. ORBCRA is an academic and industry organization, the Ohio River Basin Consortium for Research and Education. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife sponsors the Ohio River Basin Fish Habitat Partnership. And locally here in our region, we have CORBA, the Central Ohio River Business Association. All of these organizations are addressing the river in various ways. Some of us have overlapping goals and missions, but essentially we're protecting the river, we value its resources, understand its resources, and we're working to preserve those. And this doesn't even include all of the federal, state, local agencies such as the EPA and others that are working towards the Ohio River. So again, what's a river's worth? It's hard to quantify. We have some data, we need some more data, but in my opinion, the river is priceless for those arguments that I mentioned and others. And that was a quick overview of the resources. I'm happy to take questions, and we're also happy to hear your comments and contributions to this discussion, as I'm sure many of you have insights and experiences of your own to share. So with that, I'll stop and I'll ask Michael to take it away.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was a really fantastic overview. We are now moving into the Q&A portion of the discussion. If you have questions for Chris based around the topics that we've discussed here, please feel free to submit them in the chat. We will be moderating those questions, and I want to hear your voices as well as my own in this discussion. So we actually just got one right off the bat that is one of the ones that I had lined up. So the current pandemic has changed so many things about our lives. One of the biggest things that it's changed is volume of traffic, both for transportation purposes, for people, and economic goods. Chris, have you seen any changes to the ecosystem of the river since shutdowns began in March? And have you noticed a change in quality?
Yeah, that's a good question. So from an ecological perspective, it's a blink of an eye from March to today. So
Right.
We wouldn't expect to see any metrics such as the fish species or things like that change in that short period of time. So it's a little short for that. And if you look at the commodities we noted on the river, whether it's coal or gravel or grain or aggregates, things like that, those products were less affected. In other words, a lot of the homes that the coal provides the electricity for, people are at home more, things like that. So I can't say that I quantify the amount of barge traffic, but from an ecological perspective, really it's too short to see anything significant.
That is fair. I will say that I also live right by the Ohio River in Covington, and I feel like I have noticed an uptick in barge traffic. But as your slide showed, it's an incredibly efficient way of moving product, especially now that air travel is so much less available. Not that coal or gravel is being transported by air, but yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And
yeah, when I first learned that stat, that was surprising to me, that just how efficient coal or river transport is with barges.
Absolutely. And until you see the size of one of those barges on the river, it's hard to even imagine how much they really can transport. You mentioned the size of the watershed, and you also briefly mentioned runoff from the Ohio River Basin as well. Do you find that those are some of the greatest challenges presenting the Ohio River Valley, or what do you see as some of the greatest questions or challenges around the state of ecology for the Ohio River right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a complex answer. I'll give you a summary, but before that, I'll preface it by saying that we've seen vast improvements in the Ohio River over the last 60, 70 years. Orsenko was founded in 48, and with the addition of treatment systems on the river, we've seen fish populations rebound, we've seen water quality indices improve, and a lot of that had to do with the Clean Water Act in the 70s as well. But we're still faced with what we call non-point source pollution, runoff from the landscape. So whatever's happening on the land is going to affect the river. And within that large watershed, as we saw, there's mixed use. So we have agriculture, we have pastures, we have crops, we have industries, and eventually that's going to make its way to the river. So we do have the challenge of capturing non-point source pollution, and one of the big contaminants is nutrients, and so we're working to address that. Another big issue is stormwater and sewer overflows, but both Northern Kentucky and Cincinnati are working hard to address that. So we've identified the problems. We have some innovative solutions, some of which are being implemented today. But between non-point source pollution and a few of what we call contaminants of emerging concern, things that we're starting to detect in the river, like something called PFAS, is a concern of ours. But yeah, probably non-point source pollution is the biggest challenge.
That actually addresses one of the questions that I see coming in, asking what the number one threat, biological threat to water quality currently is. I don't know if you would classify that as the number one biological threat, or if you would give a different answer to that question.
Yeah, so by biological threat, I'm assuming that means threat to aquatic life. So we can evaluate, and Orsenko evaluates the river from aquatic life perspective. How well does it support drinking water source? Can we contact recreate on the river? But from an aquatic life perspective, the river is actually very diverse, as I mentioned. The entire stretch of the river from Pittsburgh to Cairo supports aquatic communities. But probably the biggest threat to biological communities, the life within the river, is habitat alteration. Some of that stemmed from the dams originally, but that runoff creates siltation and it changes light regimes, things like that. But probably habitat modification in the river is the biggest threat to aquatic organisms today.
That's a very fair point. I'm scrolling through, we're getting lots of questions, which is wonderful. So I'd like to address a couple of different questions kind of together, one that I had along with some that I'm seeing from the chat. We are stationed, like you said, right at that middle point in the Ohio River at that lock house, or former lock house, now it's Biology Field Station. There are several other lock houses across the span of the Ohio River. Like you said, previously there were many more. Do you think that there are opportunities to possibly open those and create further resources? And beyond that, you have been made president of the Organization of Biological Field Stations, and I want to congratulate you on that. Do you see more opportunities for collaboration with field stations beyond our Ohio River?
Yeah, that's two great questions. So the first one with the former lock houses, Lock and Dam 34 is upstream from us, and that's a great park that focuses on the history of river navigation, where they have a wicket dam or part of a wicket dam you can see, and a great nature preserve around it. Lock and Dam 36 is for sale. It's been for sale for a while. It's right across from Riverbend and Coney Island, so maybe we should talk to President Chillo about that. And there are several others that are available. There were 51 total locks and dams on the Ohio River. Some of the lock houses are no longer repairable, but some of them are available. And yes, creating a network, whether it's from lock houses or other opportunities, would be vital to protecting the river's resources. So we do have networks now. Orsenko monitors something like 13 stations throughout the river at dams and elsewhere to assess the river, monitor, continually protect us, safeguard public health from a drinking water perspective. In 2015, 2019, we had these unusual harmful algal blooms. And quickly after the 2015 bloom, the EPA and Orsenko established what's called a harmful algal bloom detection network. So groups along the river, including the field station, can monitor, assess the river, and keep track of that potential issue. But science is a collaborative effort. It's a teamwork. And so if we can connect, not just those along the main stem, so Marshall University in Huntington, and NKU and Thomas More, and UC here in this region, University of Louisville, we would only make the science better and really get a better understanding of the river. It's this long linear ecosystem, nearly 1,000 miles long. Then you add in the watershed. So yes, collaboration would be key to enhancing our understanding of the river, and also protection of its resources. And with regards to OBFS, the Organization of Biological Field Stations, it's along the same lines. This allows us to connect with big river field stations around the world, literally. It also provides opportunities for my students to go to those field stations, whether it's in graduate school or summer internships. So yeah, it's a great resource to be connected with. I'm honored to be the president currently. And it also helps us enhance our public understanding of environmental issues. So I applaud those that are non-scientists who joined us today to educate themselves on, their own backyards and environmental issues, the value of the river, because really, we're going to make strides not just from the scientific discoveries and the scientific data, it's the citizen support. So if the public gets behind something, we're going to have that much greater success in protecting the river. So that's why endeavors, initiatives like the Ohio River Recreational Trail, those people are going to be champions of the river. If they're out on the river and they see something, they can alert us, but they're going to want to protect and enhance this resource in which they're participating.
I couldn't agree more. And going along with that sort of investment, both on personal time and also investment in the research, like you said, it's non-scientific investment as well is a major part of the sort of overall picture, economic investment. Another question that we have from the audience is related to that. We already discussed so many different ways in which either transportation, energy, water are supplied by the river. There's a lot of opportunity for growth, as you said, in outdoor recreation as well. Do you see opportunities for specific ways that we could attract businesses to potentially take advantage of some of those opportunities and continue to grow investment in the Ohio River, both as an ecological and economic source of value for our region?
Yeah, there really is great opportunities. There are some low-hanging fruit. There are some challenges as well, but I believe both chambers of commerce in Northern Kentucky and Cincinnati recognize the value of the river and want to attract businesses based on the river. I know Dr. David Wicks and Brewster Rhodes, who are spearheading the Ohio River Recreation Trail, and their energy and their expertise and their experience, they're going to make that trail happen along with a lot of other volunteers and a lot of effort, which will bring economic opportunities, tourism dollars, dollars associated with recreational ventures, things like that. So yes, there's opportunities there. And I think with the Ohio River Basin Alliance, as I mentioned, and Orsenko as a partner, we're going to do this holistically. In other words, when we look at these economic opportunities, how does it affect the ecological value? How does it affect all of these other different uses? And so my colleagues at Orsenko always discussed that the river is such a valuable resource from many different perspectives, and they balance that. So we're trying to balance river transport with recreational opportunities. And that's a challenge, right? We have these commercial barges and we have kayakers and things like that. But the people from those different agencies are speaking together. That's the value of ORBA, this comprehensive group. So we can bring the inland water group alongside the recreational enthusiasts and work together rather than talking at each other with each other. And I think we'll make some strides. I really do.
Like I would imagine, very much like the river is a biological ecosystem, it is also a human ecosystem. There are many different pieces at play: the recreational, the transportation, the economic, that all have a space there. And I think that level of communication, like you said, is key, being collaborative in those spaces. You yourself and the Biology Field Station, through our Center for Ohio River Research and Education, have developed partnerships with many of those organizations, some of which you've discussed, and that has allowed you and the students that Thomas More University has at our Biology Field Station to do a lot of great work. Would you be willing to talk a little bit about the research efforts that you guys put on? You had mentioned the Mussel Lab and Water Quality Lab. Could you expand a bit upon the research that you guys do at the field station?
Sure. Yes, collaboration is a key of our operations as well as other agencies. Two in particular I'd like to highlight. One is with the US EPA. So we have the largest Office of Research and Development for water quality in the country, located in Cincinnati, and that's really great to have in our backyard, and we've benefited from them. So folks like Dr. Lorentz and other researchers downtown have come out here, done research, mentored our students, and we've developed projects that are in conjunction with their research. We can replicate that or substitute some of their research, and so we were able to build a aquaculture facility with that collaboration with the US EPA. And the other one is the Kentucky Fish and Wildlife, which has a mussel center in Frankfort, Kentucky, spearheaded by Dr. Monty McGregor. And we're an extension really of their lab. So they help fund our mussel lab. And so we propagate endangered and threatened species, and we work together to enhance the conservation of that group. So two in particular for which we're proud, and that's the US EPA and Fish and Wildlife. But we could go on between Orsenko and Orba and others. We really wouldn't operate to the efficiency or have the productivity we could without our collaborators.
Agreed. It really is amazing. And having spent some time at the field station myself, getting to know you and getting to know others in the field, it is amazing to see the level of collaboration and involvement that we're able to achieve. I see another question coming in. What do you see as the role of a university in this type of research arrangement? Obviously, our goal is education, but also producing research to advance the field. Where do you see universities fitting into the larger picture of ecological, basically water survey and a better understanding of the river and its role?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first and foremost, the mission of Thomas More is student-centered. So, and it extends to the field station. The decisions I make from an administrative standpoint, budgetary, programmatic standpoint, I have the students in mind, the students at the center of my decision. So will this enhance opportunities for the students? Will this develop the students while they're at Thomas More? The nice thing about that approach is that things like research, things like outreach to the community, things like public-private partnerships only enhance the student's experience. So at the field station, our students will work with the EPA. Our students will work with the Ohio River Recreation Trail, the nonprofit groups, and others. And so having these collaborations with our community, having these research focus on the river with the students in mind, really overlaps the missions. And so they're not contradictory, they're not exclusive to one another. I look at the field stations providing opportunities for my students, and those opportunities are through research, through community outreach, through partnerships. And because of our location, because of the investments we've made in the field stations facilities, we're uniquely positioned to monitor, assess, and make some strides on the river's water quality.
Agreed. And beyond that, even expanding on the student opportunity, I see so many of our students, because of those opportunities to collaborate and communicate beyond just the field station with the EPA and Orsenko, moving beyond their degree and then being really well prepared to enter into a field that they're passionate about and to be really well positioned for that as well. In that vein, preparing our students and growing those opportunities, the biology field station itself has recently celebrated its 50th anniversary. There have been some major developments out at the biology field station campus over the past few years, which have been very exciting. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you have hoped for the future of the field station and for our biology students. Do you have kind of dreams or hope on the horizon that you'd like to see grow in that area?
Yeah, thanks. So, as you mentioned, 2017, we celebrated our 50th anniversary. So the university acquired the property back in 1967. And for the first 30 or so years, we were pretty much a seasonal facility. And then we expanded, invested our resources. And probably over the last 10 years, we've seen the most amount of growth. So we built 3 buildings. We built a boathouse, we built a STEM outreach center, and we built a conference center. And our conference center is a LEED certified building, for which we're proud of. And allows us to expand our audience. So we have groups from all over the country will utilize the station's facilities and get exposure to the river. Richard Harrison and I Richard's the executive director of Morsenko, hosted a group from Russia, of all places, and they really enjoyed their time on the river and at the field station. So the expansion of our facilities allowed us to expand our audience and allowed us to diversify our stakeholders from students to scientists to the general public. And as we mentioned, that general public component is really critical for us to advance the mission of what we want to do as far as Ohio River protection of resources. But as far as the station goes, some of the programs that we are highlighting, and that is looking at harmful algal blooms that kind of came to us. We didn't really search that out. That was brought to us with the events in 15 and 19, so we're focusing our efforts there. And we're also focusing our efforts virtually. So what the pandemic did is caused us to develop programs that will allow us to reach schools remotely. And again, this was out of necessity, which is the mother of invention, correct? But we developed a lot of virtual activities. And so we want to be able to continue our contact with schools, continue to share our message, and educate folks about the ecology of the river in any way possible. And so shifting to some virtual programs, remote instruction, isn't quite the same as being here, but we're trying to make it as effective as we possibly can.
We've all had to adapt so much. This web series that we're doing now, MORETalks, is a product of that need to adapt. And again, thank you so much for joining us for this. We're coming near the end of our time. I only have a few more questions. If our audience wants to submit last questions, we still have a little time left to answer a few more. I'm happy to moderate those. Chris, we have talked about the economic elements and the ecological elements, the biological elements that all go into a greater understanding of the place of the Ohio River. Those are all in various ways regulated and sort of penned in by policy that is usually set at all levels, state, local, and federal. Do you see a place for advocacy at those from a sort of a political advocacy perspective from the community at large? And what can people do to get involved if they're passionate about protecting the Ohio River? And where can they go to learn more about those issues and how to be well informed? It looks like we may have a slight technical difficulty with Chris at this time. Hopefully his video will be back up in just a second. It looks like we may have lost video for a moment. We'll see if he's able to rejoin us in just a second. Having lived out at the Ohio field station myself, I have experienced some of the Wi-Fi related issues that you can see out there. So we will see whether he's able to rejoin us in just a moment. If not, I will be sure to pose these questions to him myself and see if I can get some answers from him after the fact once we have finished the recording of the video. And we'll give it just another minute. Again, if you do have further questions that you'd like Chris to answer, please feel free to submit them in the chat and we will do our best to address them and post them out with the video once it is published. Again, that is at more.thomasmore.edu. Taylor Ann Walls is my producer for this. Taylor, if you'd be able to post the link to our more.thomasmore.edu site in the chat so people have access to it now. We'll also be sending a follow-up email so that we are able to share that with you and the final filmed version of this once we have it completed. So it looks like we may not be able to get Chris back, but thank you again so much for joining us for this episode of MORETalks. I cannot thank Chris enough for the time that he spent sharing this with us. I think it was a fantastic presentation, and I want to thank you for your participation and your questions. I think it made this a much better talk, especially from the questions that I was going to ask. So I really appreciate your participation. If you found value in this, if you think that there is valuable information to be shared here, again, we will be sharing this out. Oh, Chris, you're back. Hello.
Yeah, sorry about that. I just lost connection, so that's going to be one of the other things at the station. I'm sure.
Bulking up the Wi-Fi connection.
I'm glad I got back on, particularly to mention that ORBA and ORCRE, the Ohio River Basin Consortium for Research and Education, is holding a summit and symposium in Louisville at the end of September, early October. And this will be a virtual event like this. And so it's opportunities for anybody from anywhere to connect. And we'll have working teams on the goals of the strategic plan. We'll have research talks. We'll have a celebration of the river, great plenary lineup. So the ORBA Summit and ORBA Symposium is going to be jointly held by our host at the University of Louisville at the end of September, and early October starts September 30th. And you can Google ORBCRE for more information.
Wonderful. Thank you. I think that we are coming near the end of our time. We have gotten a few other comments and questions as well. Let me scroll through these real quick and see. Do you have time to answer one more question, Chris?
Yeah, again, sorry I lost connection there.
Don't apologize at all. Don't apologize. Most people in the Ohio River watershed, one of our questioners asks, generally don't think of themselves as being in the Ohio River watershed. It's not an identity that many people seem to be aware of or conscientious about. What do you think makes what makes you proud to be living in the Ohio River Basin, and how do we expand that identity, that awareness beyond the banks of the Ohio River?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is a challenge with rivers. So we have this linear river in the middle of a big watershed. And as I grew up at the top of the watershed, but did not connect to the Ohio River. So it's a challenge. That's an inherent challenge in rivers with large watersheds. But we have the group set between Orsenko and ORBA and others to really get the message out. We need to make a concerted effort. But we do it tributary by tributary, watershed by watershed. So those of us at Thomas More's campus, we're in the Bank Lake Creek watershed. That flows into the Licking, which flows into the Ohio. So if we can use that watershed approach to show how we're connected, some public education, some signage along the way, right? So you're now entering the Ohio River watershed, like you might see along I-80 heading to the East Coast. You're now entering the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So we have to expand sort of the educational aspect of it, but it's a challenge. But I think we're positioning ourselves to take a basin-wide approach, whereas before, maybe we focused on the main stem, maybe we focused on the corridor. Now we recognize, not just scientifically, but from a general public standpoint, is we need to think broader and we need to think basin-wide.
I couldn't agree more. I think that is the end of the number of questions that we have prepared for today. Chris, thank you so much. This has really been a wonderful presentation. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Thank you for sharing this information and for investing so much in Thomas More University students, but also in the community at large, and helping to preserve everything that we have here in the Ohio River Basin. So,
well, I would like to thank you for the opportunity, thank the participants for joining us, and invite anyone who would like to come out and see the field station again or for the first time, please let us know.
I can say from personal experience that you and your staff are more than welcoming out there, and I would really encourage anyone that hasn't had the opportunity, go out and check it out. It is an amazing space. So thank you again, Chris, and thank you everyone for attending MORETalks. If you found value in this presentation, if questions were answered that you think are important, share this out with others. We will be publishing a final video version of this on our website, more.thomasmore.edu. It will be sent to you with a link and a follow-up email. And thank you all so much for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.